And then if the situation does escalate into physical violence or if medical attention is needed, then yes, we recommend that people call the proper authorities to help deal with that situation.
So you're really not urging people to be superheroes and jump in the way. You're giving them a lot of options that are somewhere between that and pretend it isn't happening.
Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports. Worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Of course, you good old boys in Canada and Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south. You're the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful March the 31st, 2021. Round of the Deportes. Bonjour, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Well, Charlton, it's been wet and windy down here all day long. Just raining, deluge, buckets of water and stuff. I guess they were trying to soak down the infield for tomorrow for opening day of Major League Baseball, Charlton.
Yeah.
But once again, I want to thank our frontline healthcare workers, our nurses, doctors, first responders. They can always get a seat at a baseball game.
They can always get a seat. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars also all around the world. Say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic. He'll do his thing from 3,000 miles away, and I really do appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Spotify. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Apple TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. But you better have a smart TV, or you'll be sitting there looking at a still picture. Man, I love pausing, Big C. Everybody says pause and try to wipe the sweat out of your eyes because it's starting to get hot in California. But I'll never pause on our Veterans Crisis Hotline. They really are experienced helping veterans and their loved ones get help. Big C, why should everybody care?
Well, Charlton, as all of America is crying about getting back to normalcy and getting out, Charlton, a part of normalcy in America is that what we want to eliminate, and that's called veteran suicide in this country, Charlton. We lose over 2 dozen a day to suicide, as well as many other private citizens, Charlton, to that horrific disease. So that's a part of normalcy that we don't want to return in America. We as a country need to do all that we can to stem the suicide in this country. We give out the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, Charlton.
Yep.
It needs to be a national event that everybody gives that out every day, just off the cuff, regardless of what's going on. We need to find a way to help save American citizens from suicide. I know we have developed a serum for COVID-19, Charlton, to have a vaccine, but there's no vaccine on the horizon for suicide. That comes from personal participation in talking with people and helping them out.
And very well said. We do our part. 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. If you're online, simply go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and you can definitely get some help for our veterans and their loved ones. Also very happy to be affiliated with Valley Homes Weekly TV on Dish TV, Direct TV, AT&T Uverse, TV 53, home of the San Francisco Giants and the Say Hey Kid, as well as the home run King Barry Bonds. When you reach out to them, just tell them Big C sent you. Our goal is simple: recruit 10,000 real estate agents and brokers all over this great country, helping them put people back to work. Just like McDonald's does it, car dealerships do it, sports teams are doing it too. Watch TV and real estate work for you. 800-772-8624 if you're looking for opportunities in real estate. Go to bigcsports.pacwm.com. Most of our loans are underwritten by Rocket Mortgage, the #1 lender in the country on the wholesale side. Also, all around the world, I want to just thank Xfinity, Comcast TV, and Comcast Spotlight for presenting Big C Sports to the universe. Just like God said, let there be light. Open your cell phones and just say it. Play Big C Sports Podcast you will see all of our apps pop up, and I really do appreciate the way things have grown with Big C Sports, and it happens all around the world. You know, I know sometimes people want to just focus on sports. There's a lot of good things going on with March Madness, Big C, on the men's and women's side. But I just took a peek at what's going on with the George Floyd trial, as it was brought to my attention by a good friend this morning. And I know people say, well, sometimes, you know, you got to be the innocent bystander. Like, what does the innocent bystander do? Because you want to make sure that you stay safe. But I still understand you got to respect law enforcement, but it should go both ways when you're sworn to protect and serve. They were so nasty in their first encounter with George Floyd. That's before the 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Big C, your thoughts?
But why would you say it's the George Floyd trial, Dalton? They killed George Floyd. Think about if you would have said it was the Nicole Brown Simpson trial when O.J. Simpson was on trial. This is the Derek Chauvin trial, Charlton, not George Floyd. George Floyd was the victim of this incident, so you can't use his name in that light. And that's why so many people feel that Derek Chauvin will get off, because they're saying this is a George Floyd murder trial.
Yeah, that's very well said too, Big C. That is a very good case in point. He was actually the victim of the Derek. I never really thought about it that way until you said that. But I know, you know, I maybe let my guard down a little bit, because that's how media calls it. They call it the George Floyd trial. George Floyd's not on trial. He was murdered. At the same time, when people...
Yes, he is on trial. George Floyd is actually on trial from the media perspective, Charlton. This is a situation where you're saying that if you listen to the defense attorney, they are saying that the cause of his death was from an overdose of fentanyl.
Yeah.
That he had drugs in his system. He had underlying conditions. So what the defense lawyers are trying to say is that George Floyd would have died on the 25th of May, I believe it was, at that particular time, Charlton, regardless of the police being on his neck for 9.5 minutes.
Yeah.
They're saying his death was inevitable. It wasn't caused by the police. So don't believe your lying eyes.
Yeah, and I know everybody has. I was just talking to some law enforcement about different things too, and how they always say, of course, comply. You can have your day in court at a later time if you can get through the first part of it. But it's something that brought back just things in life, as I always want to make sure I know where I am, how to stay safe. But at the same time, I wonder how many mainstream people are greeted the way George Floyd was greeted, especially looking at the insurrection that happened at the nation's capital, and it led into the death of one man. But the nation's capital, I mean, people were trying, the officers were saying, well, we were overwhelmed. We didn't know what to do. If we felt like we would have protected society or protected the state capitol, then maybe we would have been harmed. But they said they had more fear with one person than they have, I guess, hundreds of people that stormed the Capitol. Big C, your thoughts?
That's the fear of blacks. That works, Charlton, when you talk to the mainstream, when people don't have black people living in their neighborhoods, and the only time that they witness them is an incident that's like cost George Floyd his life. Think about the incident at the Capitol in Georgia when that state assemblywoman knocked on the door.
Yeah.
And the police arrested her. That police officer, in his report when he filed, he said the reason why he arrested her because the insurrection on January 6th came across his mind, and he felt that those black people were going to storm the Georgia State Capitol, that all of one woman with those 5 officers standing there,
wow,
that they were in fear of her. This has been a plot by white society forever, Charles. The fearfulness of black men and black women. You think about the defense attorney on the stand when he asked the one guy who's an MMA fighter,
yeah,
did you get angry? He said, no, I was not angry. They didn't make you mad. No, he was trying to paint him as an angry black man.
Yeah.
If you can sell a black man as being angry and threatening, then you're allowed to do anything to him in society. We saw that with Rodney King decades ago, Charlton, when they beat that man within a hair of his life, saying that he was menacing and intimidating while 12 cops was whooping his butt in the streets of Los Angeles.
Yeah, That's interesting. And if you don't speak like you're very trying to whisper, then sometimes people say, well, he's a little bit threatening and menacing. I've even heard that having business conversations. Well, make sure you pacify and just very lower your voice because you don't want to scare people. It's amazing how that same garbage is coming up again. And I hope that all the jury will ferret out justice for everybody. Big C, I want to touch on what's going on. And that's my moment of my PSA for how to stay safe. Number one, just comply if you can. But number two, sometimes people they're targeting you. Whether you comply or not, they're going to target you.
You have to answer this one question for me, Charlton. Do you feel that when George Floyd was handcuffed, laying on the ground, was he complying?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and it still cost him his life.
Yeah, I know. They were out to get him.
Think about this. If we were not in age of video recording, Charlton, do you think that there would be a trial in the George Floyd death right now?
No, not at all. Not at all.
That you answered the question. That's all it is. The only reason this trial is going on is because there's video. If it's not video, George Floyd is dead, and he cannot, testify against the police.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really shameful when we see it played out on national television, but I guess the dirt will come out in the wash. I think it already has come out. I don't even know how much more.
King, we saw that on national television.
Yeah.
And they were still able to convince a jury that the damn video lied.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They convinced the jury that the video lied, and they were justified in beating Rodney King to the extent that they did.
Yeah.
And this is what they're doing once again. They're trying to convince a jury that it was justified to kill this man, and it was justified to not let the EMT check his pulse or even for them to check his pulse because he was in a threatening posture when he was not breathing and unconscious. They were still in fear of their life. You think about it, they said they were scared of the 12 bystanders standing on the curb.
Yeah.
But he was not worried about the cars driving by right behind his back on the street.
Yep. Isn't that something, too? And they still convinced the jury to say, hey, well, we felt afraid, so we had to do what we did. It's a shame, but it's on television now, and hopefully we'll get justice. Everybody's just looking for justice. Big C, I want to touch on the world of college basketball, March Madness, but the real madness we know is happening in different parts of the country in the court system, but it's going to ferret out. The dirt will come out in the wash. Big C, the number one basketball program in men's college basketball in the country throughout the history is UCLA. The UCLA Bruins fight. Big C. Number 11, UCLA. They beat the Big Ten champion, number 1 seed Michigan, 51-49. They advanced to their 19th Final Four in the first since 2008, Big C. The great Johnny Juzang from Harvard Westlake, California High School scored 28 points, 18 in the first half. He even had a twisted ankle. Tiger Campbell had 11 points, and UCLA scored 14 points off her turnovers. That's that great defense that Cronin's brought out to Westwood, Big C. If you look at Michigan, I think one of the most overrated centers that I've ever seen in the last 20 years, his name is Hunter Dickinson, Big C. 11 points. He only had 2 rebounds. He has a left hand that couldn't even score on the playground. I have no idea how Michigan won the Big Ten. But think about this. A number 11 seed makes it to the Final Four. UCLA 2021 this year. Loyola Chicago 2018. You had VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University 2011. The great George Mason 2006. And then down in your neck of the woods, the LSU Tigers 1986. But no number 11 seed has made a national title game. I know that UCLA, they beat the SEC and the Big Ten champions in Alabama and Michigan. But I believe they're going to lose a close game to Gonzaga, the Bulldogs, the West Coast Conference champion. The first team ever with 5 30-plus win seasons in a row, Big C. And it's also kind of a revenge game from 2006 when UCLA also scored the final 11 points to win that game, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it comes down to the players on the court. I mean, history's out the window when it comes down to playing basketball, Charlton. When you think about there's nobody on these rosters that were around during those games being played. It's about the heart and the desire of the young men who are going to be able to go out and compete in that semifinal game, Charlton, to get to the national championship game.
Yeah, it's amazing because we were just talking about maybe everybody should listen to Bill Walton. He taps into his higher self. I guess he does some kind of inhaling an inhaler he uses to tap into his higher self, Big C, if that makes sense to you. The great John and saying he tied the great Bill Walton with 108 points, and the great Lou Alcindor, also known as Kareem, lead them all with 134 points in 5 NCAA tournament games in the Final Four. No team east of the Mississippi River is actually going to be in the Final Four. That's the first time it's ever happened in the universe. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, when you look at the officiating and how it's altered a few games that are being played, Charlton, and even with those West Coast teams, they've had some friendly officiating at times.
Yeah, it's always good to say it's friendly. But you Southern boys, you sound a lot taller on the radio, and when you can hand out a ranking without making people earn it. The West Coast, especially the Pac-12, they've been saying the same thing for football, basketball, and baseball. Just let us decide it on the court, on the floor, in the game. But if ever it's going to be left up to voting, if you think about what's just happening right now in basketball, if the Pac-12 were to leave their chance to compete for a national championship in the hands of Southern and East Coast media, UCLA would not be in the Final Four, because they would have said UCLA is not good enough, USC is not good enough, Oregon's not good enough, Colorado's not good enough, Oregon State's not good enough, and that's not fair. That's why I love when they do it on the floor. UCLA Bruins, so how did they get there, Big C? The Bruins are now the second team to start in the first 4 and reach the Final Four after defeating Michigan in the Elite Eight on Tuesday. UCLA joined the legendary 2011 Virginia Commonwealth University squad after beating Michigan State in overtime 86-80, despite losing by 10 at the half in the first 4. You think about Jamie Jacquez Jr., Big C, and Johnny Using combined for 50 points. The Bruins had little trouble with BYU, 73-62, and their Cinderella team in Abilene Christian out of Texas, 88-68, before a rock fight with Michigan in the Elite Eight. And once you think about it here, too, this is for West Coast people that are getting the shaft when it comes to not being ranked high enough. When you let them do it on the court, it's a different outcome. It was all Usain Big C with 28 of 11. Think about that. Scored 28, 11 of 19 shooting, 18 in the first half. Outside of him and Tyler Campbell, UCLA scored just 12 points, 5 of 25 shooting, and gave Michigan a wide opening. But we've seen that on the West Coast. They win with defense, and I also said it would come down to a possession game, and it came down to that. Before I throw it to you, the Wolverines had a ball down 51-49 with 6 seconds left, but 3-pointers from Mike Smith, and then Franz Wagner did not connect, Big C. UCLA is now going to the Final Four for the first time since 2008 in search of its 12th national title. If anything, I think this game was called biased for Michigan. UCLA, again, was in more foul trouble for no reason whatsoever, but it came down to the end and their defense won it for them. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, poor shooting night for Michigan. I mean, when you talked about the rankings of teams, Charlton, I know you were comparing that to college football, but even if it was college football and you're ranked 11th in the country, you're not going to make it into the Final 8. So, I mean, you just have to play your season out and win more games during the regular season. You think about UCLA. They were part of the 4 play-in teams. They did not make the 64 seeded teams. They had to play themselves into the tournament. So they had to play themselves in twice. They've been on a hot streak, and the kids have to commend themselves for that.
Yeah.
But to be ranked, you have to have a record to be ranked with.
Well, you can say that, but that sounds like Southern media. Alabama was considered by many people the team that was going to at least get to the Final Four. They played the Pac-12 twice, Big C. They lost to UCLA and Stanford by combined 28 points. That team went back and won the SEC championship. Stanford didn't even make the tournament. UCLA had a hard time winning in the Pac-12. So if you take away what people think and you let people decide it on the court, Alabama lost by a combined 28 points to 2 West Coast teams. And you can Google that, Big C. But I want to get also...
Well, there were some Mountain West teams that beat up on some Pac-12 teams also, if I recall, in basketball. I think it was about 6 of them beat up on some West Coast teams, and they didn't get anywhere in the tournament. So I think it's a little bit beyond that.
No, it's not beyond that. The SEC champion lost by a combined 28 points to Stanford and UCLA, and they won the SEC. The competition is not as strong down south. It just gets more media hype, Big C. But I also want to think about a team that people, for some reason, people didn't want them to get there. Just my feeling. You think about the great University of Houston, the Cougars. they're not the marquee program in Texas. I think Houston is the largest city in Texas, Big C. I believe it's the number 4 city in the United States as far as population-wise, Big C. But when you think about Houston, they're not part of that Big 12 conference. And that's where all the good old boy boosters hang out, with Texas and Texas A&M now part of the SEC. But how did Houston get here? They became the first team in NCAA tournament history to reach the national semifinals by going through 4 consecutive double seeds, Big C. Think about this. They combined the seed total opponents Houston's faced: number 15 Cleveland State, number 10 Rutgers, number 11 Syracuse, and then number 12 Oregon State. 48, Big C. And that's just the 6th time a team has faced a seed total of 45 or greater in its first 4 tournament games. People didn't want Houston to get there, but they earned it on the court, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, Kevin Sampson has done a marvelous job down there in Houston, Charlton. And when you think about the 2 schools out of that state, you know, you come from one of the largest city in the state, one of the more medium-sized cities in the state, Waco, with the Baylor Bears. But the Houston Cougars were a solid team last year, Charlton. They got beat in a last-minute buzzer beater in the tournament, but they came back. You know, when you're able to rebound from a difficult defeat like that and come back the following year, Charlton, and make it to the Final Four, that means that the kids had fortitude, that they were able to put that horrific loss behind them and come out guns a-blazing, Charlton, and make it back to the championship round.
Yeah, really proud of a lesser conference in Texas, only in name recognition, but not on the court, Big C. Congratulations to the Houston Cougars. I want to go to Baylor. I want to stay in Texas. I guess it's a battle of Waco, Big C. You go down to Waco, Texas, and the Baylor Bears, how did they get here? They were supposed to play Gonzaga earlier in the year, but COVID put everything on pause. But the Bears outscored their 4 tournament opponents by a 14-point margin, winning each game by 9 or more, Big C. The only game where the Bears may have worked up a sweat, Big C, not sweating like the great Patrick Ewing, but they worked up a sweat, Big C. It's a Sweet 16 where number 5 Villanova led 30-23 at the halftime, but it was all Baylor down the stretch. They're very physical. It's closed the game with a 21-10 run to beat the Wildcats. Otherwise, Baylor hasn't been seriously threatened. A 79-55 win over Hartford opened the tournament before the Bears took a 13-point halftime lead against mighty Wisconsin of the Big Ten, Big C, before a 76-63 win. And then you have Arkansas, Big C, the old 40 minutes of hell, Big C, back in the day, never led Baylor in a matchup of old Southwest Conference rivals during the Elite Eight. And my COT, Big C, 22 points led the Bears into the Final Four following an 81-72 win, and they look very, very strong, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Baylor has been like Gonzaga in the past 2 years of college basketball, Charlton. They've both been dominant during the regular season. And last year, neither one of the teams made it this far. But, you know, now they're getting a chance for redemption and hopefully get a chance to meet each other in the Final Four. That's their destination because they were supposed to have met earlier in the season.
Yeah, it's part of the script, Big C. They will meet each other in the Final Four. It's all fair love of war. And when you think about how they got there, and you think about the Gonzaga Bulldogs, this team is, again, 30-plus wins 5 consecutive years in a row. No one's ever done that in college basketball, Big C. Not from the great UCLA, not the great Michigans, not the Kentuckys of the world. You can't look at the great North Carolinas, the great Indianas, Kansas. No one has ever done what this program has done, even though they don't year after year play in the competition of the bigger conferences, a lot like Houston. But no one can knock them because when you get them on the court, they beat a Pac-12 team. That, to me, just my opinion, I've seen a lot of basketball in Los Angeles, California, the heart of L.A., south of Los Angeles. That's where USC is located. And I'm just telling you, from talking to some guys out here, they look like they were drugged. They look like they were not motivated. They look like they were told to keep your hands down whenever Gonzaga goes to the rim. Just my opinion. I don't think they could have beaten some street basketball teams in L.A. But how did Gonzaga get here, taking nothing away from them? They outscored its 4 tournament opponents, Big C, by 24 points en route to the Final Four, beating Norfolk State, beating Oklahoma, beating Creighton, and USC. The Bulldogs were never seriously challenged in any of the contests, leading by double digits in each game by halftime, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, maybe the USC basketball players were eating that Trojan horse food instead of eating off the training table, Charlton. But
Yeah.
Gonzaga's been good all year long. They've been a consistent team. And
Yeah.
I mean, they've been wire to wire. They've been picked by the national media to win the national championship.
Yeah.
And they did away with a Pac-12 team with ease.
They did away with a Pac-12 team with ease, but a team, if you just watch the game and watch it in slow motion, you got 7-foot-tall players at USC, and this team was the most dominant team in the tournament, blowing teams out by double digits, Big C. And they got to the game against Gonzaga. Guys driving to the basket, and they got their hands down in their waist, just watching them go and get layups. I'm telling you, something not right. It's all fair in love and war. The Bulldogs beat Norfolk State, as I mentioned, 98-55, shooting 52% from three-point range. That's incredible. Oklahoma, that matchup, Big C, in the round of 32. It was all about Drew Timme, Big C, scored a game-high 30 points and posted 30 rebounds. But I want to ask your thoughts. You're down in the West Coast, or you're down in the South. You've seen a lot of East Coast and Southern teams. Drew Timme, once he gets to the NBA, he's going to get hat. He has not a lot of skill. And I'm just saying, based on what I've seen from dominant athletes, he doesn't intimidate anybody, but he's a big guy, and it's like they tried to keep their hands off of him, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you look at the big guy in the NBA, unless you can shoot from the three-point range or you just have a totally dominant inside game,
Yeah.
you're not going to be an effective player. I mean, the game has changed and evolved over the past 2 decades as far as the usage of the big man. And so you're in no man's land half the time when you're in college and you're 7 feet tall and they try to play you in the low post.
Yeah, the guy from Michigan, I don't know how they say he's going to be NBA talent. I mean, 2 rebounds, you're 7 feet tall, doesn't make any sense. But also back to Gonzaga, how they got here, Big C. Timme led the 4 Bulldogs in double figures, 22 points. Most of his points came with USC defenders with their hands down. Watch the game in slow motion. That's a joke, Big C. 83-65 win over Creighton in the Sweet 16. And you have Andrew Nimrod contributing 17 points and 8 assists. I want to go back to this game last night again because this same USC team, they jumped on everybody they played in the tournament, Big C. And people were saying, wow, this team can pose a lot of problems. Even you said it because they had the Twin Towers, Big C, but they didn't play like Twin Towers last night against USC in the Elite 8. Future NBA draft pick Jalen Suggs was good. He fell just 2 points shy of a triple-double. He had 18, 10, and 9. Actually, 18, 10, and 8, Big C. And then Gonzaga will now look to finish its first undefeated men's Division I basketball team since the 1976 Indiana Hoosiers, also from the same state of Indiana, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, has anybody seen that white horse that runs around for USC lately?
Someone put him to sleep.
you might want to put a DNA test on that meat that those Trojans were eating, the reason why they were so sluggish.
Yeah.
That horse wasn't worth a damn and not the change.
Yeah.
So, you got to put that into consideration.
Funny thing is, you were talking about when a horse comes to a cookout, sometimes no one can find the horse when the cookout's finished and everybody's sleeping like blazing saddles back in the day. I remember it was in a football game. It was the University of Texas. They played the Georgia Bulldogs, and they had the mascot from Texas and that bulldog from Georgia. And the bulldog felt a little bit brave until the mascot, the big bull, charged him. He had a different frame of thought, Dixie. Your thoughts?
It's called getting pumped, Charles.
No, it's called getting smart. I'm telling you, a dumb dog would have stayed there and been trampled, but a smart dog got up and ran like most people would in front of a 1,400-pound bull. But I congratulate Gonzaga. But I'm telling you, they remind me offensively of the UNLV team back in the days of Grandmama, Larry Johnson, Stacey Augmon, them good old boys. But that UNLV team, how they're different than Gonzaga. Tarkanian had a different kind of athlete. The kind of athlete that found success also at the next level. Gonzaga, it just seemed to me like a lot of teams played with their hands down. I did pick them to win the national championship when the season began because I think of some of this stuff, there's a lot of shenanigans going on in the background, Big C. But at the same time, they did follow the script, and they're going to beat UCLA because that's in the script, and they're going to play Baylor because that's also in the script. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I guess you're contending, Charlton, that the West Coast Athletic Conference is better than the Pac-12.
Hey, I'm saying only one team, and anyone can win when you keep your hands down on defense. But it's all fair level. The great Richard Pryor was in a comedy skit one time when he got into a ring with this tough guy, and he said, "Blankety Blake, put your hands down." And Richard Pryor put his hands down, and I think USC was watching that movie last night. You know, the late John Wayne was also an actor. You know, he also went to USC. They took acting classes on how to pretend they're playing defense. It's all fair and level war. Congratulations, Gonzaga. Before we do the Big C pause, in fact, we'll do the Big C pause now, and I want to come back and touch on the Final Four, how it's set to roll for the men's, and in the words of the great Arnold Schwarzenegger, we'll be back. All right, we're back from the Big C pause, also known as the Big C timeout. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. There's so many apps, and I really do appreciate the way things have grown with Big C Sports. I also want to say thank you to Xfinity Comcast TV and Comcast Spotlight for presenting Big C Sports to the universe. Just like God said, let there be light. Open your cell phones and say play Big C Sports Podcast. You will see all of our apps pop up, and I really do appreciate the way things have grown with Big C Sports. So now, we are at the Final Four coming up for this weekend, Big C. NCAA Tournament semifinals, #1 Baylor. They're a 5-point underdog against #2 Houston on Saturday. It's a 5:14 p.m. East Coast time tip-off. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I mean, this is going to be a slugfest. You got a run-and-gun team, Charlton, versus a great athletic team. I mean, Houston can get up and down the floor with anybody. They have a lot of young players on their roster that haven't been at this point or had the pressure on them before. And I don't know if they're going to play with any pressure on their back. I think all the pressure's on Baylor to deliver for the state of Texas and live up to their preseason accolades.
And try to live up to their preseason accolades. I'm telling you, Baylor's a very physical team. But whatever USC ate before their game, don't eat that. I'm telling any program, play defense with your hands up. Don't just make it look like you're such a great acting job. It's all fair and level war. #1 Gonzaga, they're a 13.5-point favorite over #11 UCLA Saturday, 8:34 p.m. kickoff. East Coast time. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I mean, you know, everybody has conceded that Gonzaga is going to be there in the end and cutting down the net. It's still yet to be seen. I mean, this is a team that has had these type of accolades before where people had picked them to win it all. But, you know, when the moment's big, you know, the big-time players show up.
Big-time players make big-time plays. I wish them all nothing but the best, Big C's, all fair and level war. But keep in mind, the great John Wayne, he was a graduate of USC, and he was great at acting. It's all fair and level war. I want to jump over to the women's side of college basketball's Final Four, Big C. And we have some great teams, Big C. The women's Final Four for 2021. There's 3 #1 seeds, Big C, that advance. But Stanford and UConn, they remain the favorites. When you think about the updated BPI, it says UConn is about a 44% favorite to win the title, with Stanford coming in at 30%, South Carolina coming in at 19%, with the great Arizona Wildcats coming in at 7%, and then trailing the Huskies. Which is your favorite team when you think about it? There's some great dynamic women coaching in these games. Also have some African-American coaches in this tournament as well, Big C. Which one is your favorite, unlike on the men's side, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, you know, I like to see Don Staley and Gino Auriemma really go after each other, Charlton.
Yeah.
When I think about 2 dynamic coaches that have done so much for the development of young women, Charlton, in the eastern part of the United States.
Yep.
They have done that. Don Staley has been such a mentor as well as a great coach. Gino Auriemma, for a man to have dominated the women's game for so long,
amazing,
to make so many consecutive Final Fours. I mean, you know, he's always history in the making.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, to have a man out there that all these young ladies believe in and follow his instructions so intensely, to make them all successful, he's done a lot of things right.
He really has done a lot of things right. I like what Stanford's doing also, Tyra Vanderbilt, Big C. Everybody has their own flavor, but I do want to mention to the sports universe that Pac-12 has 2 of the Final Four teams trying to bring down the nets and cut down the nets to have that one shining moment. You know, sometimes, you know, the great Aretha Franklin talked about respect, Big C. I know we all talk about men and women, how they're being treated. big money, big market programs compared to small money and small market programs, sometimes they're treated differently, Big C. I want to get your thoughts on this. I know you maybe don't have a beaver in the fire, if that makes sense, Big C, but the NCAA, as a nice parting gift for the Oregon State Beavers, they had no respect, like the great late Rodney Dangerfield, no respect for the Oregon Beavers, Big C. As soon as they got back to the hotel, they were told to pack up and get on a 1:15 a.m. flight back to Eugene, Oregon. Everyone had hurriedly packed their bags and had to get to the airport. The team arrived in Corvallis at 4 o'clock this morning. Actually, 4 o'clock on Tuesday morning it was. But it's hard to look past how the NCAA treated Big C student athletes at the largest money event the entire organization. The Beavers didn't make it past the Elite Eight, but at least they deserve some respect from the NCAA after the loss. I don't think how they treated them was making the Beaver fly home at night. It's not very classy, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you look around in hotel rooms, normally they have a lot of wood furniture. You know the Beavers love to eat wood. So to eliminate the Oregon State Beavers, Charlton, from putting any damage in that room, chewing up the furniture, they just send them home early.
That's not fair. Oh, that's funny. But it's not fair. The Beavers do like wood. I guess they can justify getting the Beaver out of the wood as soon as possible. It's all fair enough war. I want to touch a little bit. No wonder they got that USC horse out of March Madness. They didn't want that horse. It had no place to use the restroom to relieve itself. Big C.
That horse, you have not seen it. And USC was just a little sluggish. So you got to be careful about the meat they eat.
Yeah, it's all fair.
We know they didn't eat beaver, so it was another type of protein on the menu. And he had 4 legs also.
They could have had the Big C burger. It's a tasty burger, and it does come with exotic meats. But I also want to talk about, because we talk about college basketball, we also talk about how the law, oftentimes when people can't get along, the law will try to ferret things out. The Supreme Court Justice, this is for everybody that says sports and politics don't mix. You know, the guys down at Fox News. Supreme Court Justices, Big C, they grill the NCAA, not like grilling that Beaver at Oregon State, but they call in arguments entirely circular and somewhat disturbing. The Supreme Court Justices on today expressed significant questions about the NCAA's athletic compensation limits, Big C, but they also show concerns that a case challenging those limits could destroy college sports as they currently exist, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, college sports is about to be disbanded as it exists, Charlton. It is too much collusion in college sports, limiting athletes to profit off of their likeness, Charlton, and only the NCAA and the coaches and universities can like it. You know, when you think about coaches, Charlton, making upwards to $10 million a year for coaching these kids, and these kids can't get any compensation, that's where the Supreme Court is really going to challenge this with antitrust.
Yes, it's always, like Mark Ehrman said, well, let's talk about it after the tournament's over because we haven't cashed the check yet. It's all fair enough war. NCAA's lawyer, Seth Waxman, contended that legal precedents and the law itself should allow the NCAA to set the compensation rules because the public benefits from having a choice between pro and amateur sports as the NCAA defines amateur sports. So why do you want the NCAA, which has been committing antitrust violations for 100 years, you're going to let them be the judge of their own trial, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, the NCAA is well aware, Charlton, that less than 1% of their athletes have the ability to play professional sports. And that they're bilking 99.2% of them for the money. And, you know, it's like owning cattle. Yes, the cattle's eating off your land, but he's not profiting off of his skin once he starts taking to market, Charlton. That's that horse from USC. So, you know, when we look at how wrong athletes have been done over the decades, you get a lunch from somebody, all of a sudden you lose your eligibility. You're not allowed to receive any benefits as an athlete. I think the reason why the NCAA will move the law on this, Charlton, because there's open gaming in all 50 states now in the United States. And that's what the NCAA originally was trying to protect against, players being bought off to fix games. But now that there's open gaming across the country, Charlton, they can't control it in any kind of way. So you might as well let the players get compensated by their likeness versus going out throwing football, basketball, baseball games, and hockey games.
The USC, the best defense going into the March Madness, and against Gonzaga, they were told to keep your hands down, and they did it. It's all fair level war. But think about it. However, he faced pointed inquiry from nearly all the justices, Big C. Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh asserting that the antitrust laws that we've been talking about for 6 years, Big C, should not be a cover for exploitation of the student athlete. Isn't that something? You have a Supreme Court justice, and I think Mr. Kavanaugh is the best Supreme Court justice, just my opinion, that he kind of goes right down the middle. He's fair, it seems, based on the laws that I've studied that he's been a part of. But he says that it's an antitrust violation should not be a cover for exploitation of student athletes. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, this is what it's always been about, exploitation, Charlton. I mean, when you can limit a student's ability to go from one university to another and participate in his sport of choice, his or her sport of choice, Charlton. But coaches can leave freely at any time for more compensation, and they don't have the problem that an athlete has. I mean, coaches even block athletes from transferring within the conference because they control them.
Yeah.
And that control needs to be, taken away from the university and the coaches and give the athletes the same amount of freedom.
Yeah, well, the president Emmerich said, well, let's talk about it after March Madness. Okay, Kavanaugh said, no, what you guys are doing is wrong. The writing's on the wall. So Kavanaugh added it does seem that schools are conspiring with competitors, agreeing with competitors, Big C. On the other hand, Chief Justice Roberts, he did question the plaintiff's attorney, Jeff Kessler. He talked about the notion, the decision, and by the additional benefits approved by lower courts in the case could leave more legal erosion of any limits on athletes' compensation. Justice Elaine Kagan, Big C, called it during questioning of Kessler the kind of floodgates argument, like what's next argument. Athlete compensation is just going to go up, and then pretty soon will just be like a regular labor market. It's always been that way for the coaches who are predominantly Caucasian. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, maybe they need to put a call in to Reggie Bush and have him come testify in behalf of the athletes, Charlton. Those guys out there in the Pac-12 and at USC, when you're getting over $300,000 to participate as an alleged student athlete, set a precedent for the rest of the country.
Well, I can't confirm or deny it, but I know a lot of programs, whether it's in the SMU got shut down, they shut down their whole program. Ohio State's had some problems. Look at what just happened with Les Miles from LSU, what he was doing. They just pass those guys around. They protect them all, but it's all fair and love and war. I'm glad to see the Supreme Court justices deciding to say, wait a minute, sports and politics does mix. Maybe they do follow Big C sports more than we think. It's all fair and love and war. I know we follow them. I want to jump to the world of NBA basketball, where you can get paid for your performance. You can get paid for your likeness. The great Jamal Murray scored 30 points. Michael Porter Jr. added 27. And the Denver Nuggets raced out to a 25-point lead on the way to a 104-95 win over the slow-starting Philadelphia 76ers on Tuesday night. And something was off with the 76ers. It's all fair and love and war. But Nikola Jokic, Big C, added 21 points for the Nuggets, who played in front of a home crowd for the first time since the pandemic shutdown, and reserve Tyrese Maxey led the Sixers with 13 points. All of that happened in the fourth quarter. Big C, your thoughts?
They were off to that Rocky Mountain High in Colorado, Charlton. That's what they were off to. When they got off the plane, they stopped by one of those hip stops before they went to the hotel, and they could not get their legs up under.
They should have had the Philly cheesesteak or the Big C burger. It is a tasty burger, and it comes with exotic meats. It's all fair and love and war. But when I go back to what happened, Jamal Murray, when he played in the bubble last year, I got to see him a lot more, and I think the whole world, in fact the whole NBA universe, got to see him a lot more. Last night, dropping 30 points reminded me of how he was playing in the bubble. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, he's a mismatch when it comes to Philadelphia as far as guard play.
Yeah.
They don't have anybody who can match up with him defensively, and he demonstrated that last night, Dalton. The key to the NBA is all about mismatch.
Yeah.
When you can match up with people or when you cannot match up with people, you always see the difference in the games and in the outcome.
Yeah, always it's about matchups. That's why I was wondering, how did Michigan, they got help from the officials as much as possible. And then the same thing, they had a guy that's 7 feet tall, only gets 2 rebounds, and they said he's NBA. Some things have changed. That guy couldn't have played for the UNLV Run and Rebels back in the day. Larry Johnson wasn't 7 feet tall. He grabbed more rebounds than 2 in games, Big C. But it's all fair and love and war. Back to the NBA, Chuma Okeke scored 18 points, and the Orlando Magic rallied in the fourth quarter. They snapped the Los Angeles 6-game winning streak on Tuesday night, defeating the Clippers. I guess you would say they clipped their wings, Big C, by the score of 103-96. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I mean, you know, as we get to this point in time in the NBA season and attrition sets in, you're seeing a little bit of that when those scores are low.
Yeah, when the scores are low. Orlando made 22 of his first 25 free throws in the game, including 11 of 13 in the fourth period, Big C. The 66 points by Orlando in the second half is tied for second most and had his third and fourth best quarters of the season. When you think about Leonard, the great claw, they call him Kawhi Leonard the Claw, he added 28 points for the Clippers. Luke Kennard added 17 points. And then Zubac had his 10th double-double of the season with 14 points and 13 rebounds in a solid game. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you know, we talked about load management. You never know who's going to play with the Clippers. You know, we talked about that Rondo trade.
Yeah.
That Rondo trade didn't put really any points in the backcourt for the Clippers, and it's showing already.
Yeah, it's showing already. And again, but you mentioned something that it might even be, it's a cynical side of me to say this, but with so many of the big players out in East Coast or East Conference and West Conference, LeBron James and Davis for the Lakers, they'll have more rest when the playoffs come around. You know, the season ended down in the bubble, and they didn't have the same time off that they would have had in a regular NBA season. So these players are conspicuously hurt, Big C. I'm not saying there's acting classes in Los Angeles, but it's just a pause to think on. And then also when I go to the East Coast, Durant, maybe he is more injured than people put on, but this started out being it's a day-to-day thing. Oh, then it's a week-to-week thing, and now he hasn't played a game, it seems, since they left the bubble, Big C. Joel Embiid, similar thing. These big guys that they want to have them around for the playoffs, they're all conspicuously hurt right now when they're needed the most, or maybe not the most. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you got to worry about getting back in rhythm, though, Charlton.
Yeah.
When you lose, you miss multiple games.
Yeah.
You got to get in continuity with the players that are playing, and you think about players that have helped the team win. You're going to take them out of the rotation, and how will that affect things overall? Will they be as effective coming off the bench as they were in the starting lineup?
Yeah, it's almost even like Steph Curry. You know, Steph Curry has his splash brother been out, and Klay Thompson. He was hurt the NBA Finals against Toronto when he came down wrong on his knee, tore an ACL, and then somehow got hurt. He was also in LA. I tell you, there's a lot of acting classes in LA. Big C. He was hurt in Los Angeles. He wasn't hurt in the Bay Area, and now he's missing the whole season. I mean, something's going on, but it's all fair and level war. I wish everybody nothing but the best, Big C. The NBA, the stars rising. You ever heard of the Rising Phoenix, Big C? The great Devin Booker dropped 21 points, not that impressive. And then you had Dario Saric, Big C, added 20. And the Phoenix Suns held on in the final minutes to beat the Atlanta Hawks. I guess they turned the heat up on those birds and they cooked them. I thought when you cook the bird, you had to have the oven up around 400 degrees, but they cooked those Hawks from Atlanta 117 to 110 on Tuesday night. Big C, when you cook them at 110, they might be a little bit raw to eat. See your thoughts?
Well, every now and then you might want to have a little Falcon tartare, Charlton. A lot of people are into that.
Yeah.
Here's the Falcons. The Hawks.
Yeah.
They went on that 10-game winning streak, 8-game winning streak, the longest they've had since 2016. And now all of a sudden they're trying to match that with a losing streak on the road. Charlton.
Yeah, what's happened? I mean, they were doing well. They had the coaching change right at the NBA All-Star break. Maybe Bill was doing his thing. They were running up and down the court. And then they got robbed in Los Angeles against the Clippers. I mean, that happened. And I was like, how in the world? That's just my opinion, Big C. I watch a lot of things on slow motion. And I say that was definitely a foul. Like the Gonzaga, not the Gonzaga, but the Baylor game and the UConn game. That was a double foul. It wasn't called. It's all fair and level war. There was a foul against Riley for UCLA last night. All he did was put his hands up in the air, and they called a foul against the Michigan player that grabbed 2 rebounds at 7 feet tall. But it's all fair and level war. Going back to the NBA, the Suns have won 6 of their past 7 games, Big C, while the Hawks have dropped 4 of 5. Phoenix, when you look at Jay Crowder, He added 19 points. He was 5 of 8 from his three-point attempts, including a huge one with 23 seconds left, and that ultimately sealed the win. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, when you look at a young team like the Hawks, Charlton, you don't have those veterans that can help you get over the hump when you have a disappointing loss like they had with the Clippers, Charlton. It becomes demoralizing, especially when you're on an 8-game road trip. You really don't have your home to go relax in, get your own bed, and get back in your thoughts. Yeah,
a lot of guys have to deal with that, having back-to-back games, just trying to cut down on COVID. They're saying that COVID is rising again all over the country as people are starting to get relaxed and they want to have full stadiums because I guess science is old news. No one trusts science anymore, Big C. But going back to the Suns and what they've done, Big C, Devin Booker scored 21 points, Sargent had a 20, and they did win that game 117-110. The Suns have a good team. They've won 6 of the past 7 on the way to knocking out the Hawks, Big C. But think about Clint Capella and Young. Had 10 points for the Hawks. Before the break, Capella finished 14 points and 16 rebounds. Very dominant on the rebound, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, but you need more than just your big man. When you talk about Young, not getting 20 points. This is supposed to be your leading scorer, your team leader. And when he's only getting 14 points in a game, Charlton, you're not going to win many of those.
Yeah, you're not going to win many of those. The great Clint Capella, I thought that Houston went south, no pun intended, when they got rid of Capella and they tried to go small ball. And now the guys they tried to build around small ball are all gone. Harden's gone, and then Westbrook is gone, and Clint Capella's gone, and now he's doing this thing on a different team. But it's all fair and level war. I wish everybody nothing but the best. But I still think Atlanta's going to fly into the Eastern Conference playoffs. I think they'll get their wings fixed. And then as far as the Suns are shining so bright right now, they're probably going to be at least a top 1 or 2 seed in the Western Conference. We wish them all nothing but the best. Big C, I know you like Buffalo. In fact, some people love bison. And speaking of bison, they could have the Big C burger. It is a tasty burger, and it comes with exotic meats. I want to take you to the NHL, National Hockey League, Big C. You think about the Buffalo Sabres. An epic winless streak continues. It's not right. You're on ice, and you still can't win. How do you get back on track? The Buffalo Sabres, Big C, they're 0-15-3 since February 25th, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, an 18-game winless streak, Charlton. I think they had the Houston Rockets on their mind because we know the Houston Rockets had a 20-game winless streak, until they broke that about a week and a half ago, Charlton. And the Buffalo Sabres are trying to tell them, we can do the same thing on ice.
We can do better than you can. It's all fair level. It has to be a little bit demoralizing whenever you get to that point and you're not winning games. But when you think about it, Big C, they own the record for the longest winless streak of the shootout era since 2005-2006, and have tied the 2003-2004 Pittsburgh Penguins for the most consecutive losses, including overtimes and shootout losses in the 21st century. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you talk about being snake bitten when it's froze. I want to see a snake get across the ice and stuff and see how he feels, when his belly frozen. But the Buffalo Sabres, bisons can live in cold weather. They're big in the Midwest part of the country, the Montanas and Idaho, out there in Yellowstone. But, I guess they're not built to play in Buffalo. No pun intended.
No pun intended. They even have some bison out there at Catalina Island in Southern California. How they get across the water, I have no idea. Maybe someone brought them on a boat or something. Like Jurassic Park is all fair and level war. Go back to the Philadelphia Flyers, Big C, 17-13-4. They're 5th in the East Division versus Buffalo Sabres are 6th, 23-5. 8th in the East Division for some great hockey played up in the great Northeast. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, these teams are facing each other tonight, and it doesn't look like Buffalo is going to get out of that losing column once again, Charlton. The last time these teams met, Philadelphia beat them in overtime. Yeah, beat them in overtime, and you think about it right now, I think Philadelphia visited the Buffalo Sabres after the Flyers defeated Buffalo 4-3 in overtime, as you had mentioned. Good game on ice. If you gotta have something on ice, and a team's losing, not only are they losing, but they have to be very cold, Big C. That's not a good thing to be. You losing and you're cold, Big C. Your thoughts? Well, on frozen pond is where they are. So with the tears in the ice, you never even see it.
Yeah, it's all fair level war. I love dealing with the people on ice, but I know NBA basketball is fantastic. There's a lot of players that are trying to stay healthy. by resting up, by taking some time off. But I want to get Big C's thoughts as we go back to the world of the NBA where they play. They don't play on ice, but sometimes players can come up ice cold in their shooting, if that makes sense to you. Tonight's schedule on Wednesday, March 31st, the last day of March, Big C, for 2021. We have Portland. They're at Detroit. Will Dollar Dane and McCollum take their act to the Motor City? Big C, your thoughts?
I mean, Portland has become very inconsistent as of late, Charlton. I mean, Detroit is totally depleted, so Portland should be able to walk out with a victory.
The great Miami Heat at Indiana. Maybe they can stay in town for a while to watch March Madness, but the Miami Heat, they're at the Indiana Pacers. You would think Miami, again, being the team that was runner-up last year in the NBA Finals to the Lakers, I would have thought they would have played much better basketball. Maybe they'll start turning up the heat. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Indiana's been playing well at home. When you think about Sabonis and Mitchell Charlton, you know, what they've done there. I mean, this is going to be a tough bout for Miami to come in town, Butler and crew, and walk out with a victory.
It's going to be tough. The great Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic at the Boston Celtics, Jason Tatum, games already underway, Big C. You know, a lot of people want to compare Luka Doncic to the great Larry Bird. I don't know why. Larry Bird didn't have the Euro step, but he was a great shooter. And then it looks like Doncic has the Euro step, and he's a great shooter. But Larry Bird, obviously one of the best Boston legends over there. But I mean, Jason Tatum, to me, he's a guy that they should compare to Larry Bird. If they're going to win a championship, it's going to have to be the great Jason Tatum. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Jason Tatum, I mean, they got a trio of young stars there in Boston, Charlton, that all play tremendous basketball. But when you think about Luka Doncic and what he has done, his impact on the NBA since arriving 3 years ago, Charlton, he's going to be a budding star for years to come in this league.
Yeah, he has a lot left in the tank, Big C. Houston is at Brooklyn. Will Brooklyn and James Harden might, I know he'll score 30, but will he get to 40 in a routine game, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, you got to look at Houston, and they're going to be excited going into Brooklyn. New York just legalized the use of medical marijuana today.
Oh, really?
Recreational marijuana, so those guys off the planes out there in Houston might be looking for a little stress relief.
A little news flash for you, Big C. New Yorkers didn't wait for anyone to legalize anything before they decided to do the huff and puff, if that makes sense to you. It's all fair level war. And speaking of huffing and puffing, Utah is at Memphis. Maybe they'll eat too much barbecue. That's a game they got to be careful of not to get had. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Utah is playing tremendous basketball right now, Charlton. They're moving up the ranks in the Western Division, and they're looking to be a second or third seed once it's all said.
They're trying to get there once it's all said. New York Knicks at Minnesota should be a win by the New York Knicks. Toronto at OKC. Sacramento Kings at San Antonio. And you have Milwaukee in what people thought would have been a preview of the NBA Finals. Possibly Milwaukee's at Los Angeles Lakers tonight at Staples Center. And the Lakers are depleted right now. But Milwaukee, they played like they had no energy when they lost to the Clippers. In fact, they played like they went to that same acting school that USC went to before they played Gonzaga.
Well, Charlton, you know, the Lakers are fit to be had right now. You know, people can say, you know, they're injury prone and they got the big guys out of the lineup. But the guys on the roster still under contract, and they got to play.
They still go under the contract, and they still got to play. It's all fair and level war. Final game of the NBA, you have Chicago, the Chicago Bulls, at the Phoenix Suns, and the Phoenix Suns are rising. Chris Paul doing his thing. They have Aiton doing his thing, Big C. Booker's doing his thing. Chicago really has no chance. And again, this team in Phoenix, no one really thought this when the season began. But the way they've been playing since they brought the great Chris Paul in from I guess OKC, didn't want a guy that had you knocking on the playoff doors every year. But they've been, since he showed up in Phoenix, they've been very hot, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, you got to look at Chris Paul's career, Charlton. Ever since he left New Orleans and went to Los Angeles, he's been a perennial playoff participant. And every place he's gone since he's left New Orleans, he has gotten his team into the playoffs. I know there's a lot of talk about James Harden being the MVP, but when you look at Chris Paul, he's got to be put up there in the top four himself.
Yeah, maybe so, but he's no James Harden. I mean, you can
But it's not about scoring to be the MVP. It's do you make the people around you better from a leadership perspective? I think people get lost too much on statistics and think that's the only value of an MVP in the league is how many dunks did you have. how many three-pointers did you knock down? It's how you make your team better. Look at the position of a team before an individual shows up, and look at the productivity after they've arrived. And that's what James Harden as well as Chris Paul represents this year in the NBA.
Yeah, very well said, but I still think he's no James Harden. James Harden's really stepped the game up for himself and also the Brooklyn Nets. But Chris Paul's doing his thing. I've always liked him the way he's played basketball. Congratulations to the men and the women in the world of March Madness heading to the Final Four for the men and the women teams. I hope that we'll see some great basketball on the men's and women's side. I really like if we can see UConn against Stanford, but everybody has their own opinion. Arizona is doing their thing as well as South Carolina, Big C. And then in the men's, you have the UCLA Bruins and the great Bill Walton commentating. They should let Bill Walton commentate that game against Gonzaga. Maybe a revenge game for Gonzaga. At the same time, I hope that UCLA didn't go to the same acting class that the USC Trojans went to for their defense. And then you have the Battle of Texas. When people say the Battle of Texas, Big C, you would have thought it would be Texas and Texas A&M. No, Big C. It's Baylor and Houston. Should be some great basketball on the men's and women's side. And I want to get your final thoughts on the tournament so far. We've gotten through COVID. I know there were some coaches from Baylor saying we don't want to test anybody else for COVID. I think the NCAA has done a great job, Big C, getting the men and the women here really without any kind of problems, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it comes down to what we're accustomed to and seeing in March Madness, Charlton. Unfortunately, the arenas have not been packed with fans, so it has left a little bit to be desired. But the play on the court has spoken for itself. The kids have made the decisions for the most part, other than those officials out there from the West Coast, swaying the decision in a couple games. But I think, to have it back once again after a year hiatus is good for everybody.
It's good for everybody. So I wish everybody nothing but the best. Tomorrow is opening day for Major League Baseball. Hit deep, right field, back to the wall, a home run. It's off there in Leavenworth. Baseball will have some fans in the stands for the opening pitch on baseball on Thursday. Looking forward to that. Hopefully, we'll see the Dodgers represent the West Coast again as they chase down another World Series. Big C, it's off there in Leavenworth. Big C, back in the day, there's a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, rumble, young man, rumble. With all you've got to use, how can you lose? Big C, what are you looking forward to in this sports universe?
Well, Charlton, there was an alleged petition going around in the NFL today that the New York Jets and the New York Giants were petitioning the NFL to move back over to the state of New York, Charlton, from New Jersey, because today New York legalized marijuana, Charlton, for recreational use, so that they want to be able to get in on the pot of that.
Wow.
But once again, I want to thank the frontline healthcare workers, the nurses, doctors, and first responders. They're always around, Charlton, and they're not worried about who's using the marijuana.
They're not worried about it. In fact, some people say it's healthier than opioids, if that makes sense to you. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. It's all fair and loving words. My mama always says there's never, ever an excuse for racism or domestic violence. If you know any man, woman, or child going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and ask for help, because no man, woman, or child should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.